with the fact that this is going to be an intense meeting. We hope it's an intense meeting. We hope that what we get from each of you is to really think about those key components that we need to ensure are included. We are starting with a reminder again that we have been clearly informed that the funding formula as it exists now, if an item is in there, it is still in there. We're not losing anything. So this is looking to those items that we want to be sure have that strong consideration for inclusion as we move forward. So. And with that, Jamie, I'm going to let you drive the conversation here for a moment and take us through these, just give us an overview of how we want to see this work today.
All right, sure. Thanks, Nancy. So as Nancy just said, today is definitely packed, jam-packed. So what we're going to do is just quickly run you through the slide deck so you can kind of see the goal for today. And just it will frame our conversation. I also want to run you a little bit through the timeline for January. Somebody give me a thumbs up that you can see the slide deck. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So our statement, as you know, is right here on the slide. We'll get back to that in just a moment. I'll let Nancy do that one. Just want to let you know that we're going to start right here, which is the preview of January. Meeting number 4, which is today. Our goal is really to prioritize all of our suggested resources for a new funding formula. And so that's taking all of the feedback so far, that's taking all of your brainstorming sessions in meetings 1 through 3, and really thinking about how do we prioritize what we want to put on what we consider a first draft. So this draft is what we will actually turn in at the end of our meeting today as our formal recommendations for a draft document. You did receive resources right here. You received those resources right back before the break. Those are in the Google Drive. They are under a folder called January Materials or January Resources. And so they are there for you. I hope you've had a chance to look through some of those. If you have not, I encourage you to get in there. And then between meetings 4 and 5, let me see, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Just one moment. Let me see. All right. I think that sounds a little bit better. Between meetings 4 and 5, that is when the department will release a draft formula or a draft framework based on all the feedback. And that will be released kind of our dead week, if you consider the way our meetings work is a week on, week off, week on, week off. So next week, the department will put out that framework. It will be available for 1 week for public comment. And that will prep us for meeting number 5. Just to make it very clear, the framework will not include any dollars. Remember, that's decided by the governor and the General Assembly. It will likely happen after the State of the State address. We'll just see. However, know that it will not include any dollars. So it's just those resources that we are recommending be part of the funding formula. So that, yes, Dale?
So Jamie, this framework, will it be something that district finance directors and superintendents can look at to, I know the state's not going to give a dollar amount, but could they use their existing allocation to plug this in to see how this would affect their students in their local districts?
I'm not so sure a formal answer on that one, but I'll get it. I don't see why they couldn't. I mean, it is just a draft document. And so I would assume if you want to provide some really specific feedback and you want to plug in what you currently have with a draft, that may give you a little tighter perspective to provide that feedback. Probably a good idea.
Hey, Jamie, what about are those that are on the steering committee, those legislators that are on the steering committee, are they going to be using that draft as they host their own meetings in their community to get feedback? For instance, Bo Watson has already scheduled 4 meetings in the community to get public input. And I'm assuming they'll be reacting to that draft. Is that correct?
I would assume so as well, but I'm going to get you a tighter answer on that. So before we wrap today, I'll get you an answer. All right, so as you can see, that draft really drives meeting number 5. And so if you're looking at the slide, the idea is to really review the comments from the public on that draft structure, and then to make our final recommendations. And meeting number 5, that'll be the nitty gritty. We also really want to think about how does that roll us into meeting number 6. Meeting number 6 is really about the considerations around policy making and also how to define those words that we are including in the funding formula, such as ED or EL or rule. So some of the conversations this week have really started to go down the rabbit hole with definitions. Know that that is on the docket for meeting number 6. So think about today is really about prioritizing those resources. I will have the list. We literally make bullet points. And then by meeting number 6 is where we'll really get into that definition development and recommendations. Also in meeting number 6 is where we're going to start thinking about the supports and resources that are needed for communities to really move forward or productively move forward with the new formula. What do school boards need? What do community leaders need? And so just really trying to support the development of those resources to shore up the rollout and shift in a new funding formula for communities. So that's meeting 4, 5, and 6. Meeting 4, prioritize today, get a good first draft. In between 4 and 5 is when that draft will be released from the department. We'll have 1 week of public comment. Meeting number 5, we'll get back together to review that comment on the drafting structure and then make our final recommendations. And then meeting number 6 is where we'll really try to think about policy and defining and thinking about the resources needed to make it happen. So does that help? A little bit of trajectory for you. All right, so I'm going to show you just quickly the slide deck, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Nancy and Scott, and they can roll you right through it. So when we're talking about prioritizing, remember we have the 4 buckets. Today, really you're focusing more on like base, weights, directed funding and outcomes. However, we still want to think about must have, should have, nice to have, long shot. Those will likely be more of a conversation when we get back for meeting number 5, where we really start kind of listing them in order. Remember the general overview of feedback. It is a consolidation of all 18 subcommittees and all of our community feedback. And we are definitely collecting it as an overall big trend level feedback, which we've looked at a couple of different times, and then pulled into the 4 categories or 4 components, I should say, of a student-based funding formula. You'll probably remember this slide. This week, you'll see red questions at the bottom. Those guiding questions are really help you kind of to direct the conversation into that really specific space. So this is nothing different than you've seen before. These are the requests, loud and clear. No one should receive less state funding than they currently receive in the BEP. There's no world where anybody's going to get anything less. Definitely a request to maintain flexibility for local budgeting. Also a request to ensure whatever is currently funded outside of the BEP is included in a new funding formula. And so that may spark some conversation as well today. And then, of course, local match should be reconsidered. So when we're talking about that maintenance of effort, that match is not going to change, that local match. That's the overall feedback. And then we're going to get into the 4 components of that pyramid. We'll talk about the base. Think of this as your must-haves. These are the things that we have to have. You'll see the guiding question is really around, look at these. This is surfaced as high level, every subcommittee, the majority of subcommittees. These are the things we know we're going to list. Are there others beyond the bulleted list here that we want to talk about? Or are there more specifics in the bulleted list that we need to talk about, we need to shake out? You'll see the same thing in weights, same thing in additional dollars or direct funding, and then same thing again in outcomes. And then we're at the end of our meeting. So just go ahead and start, really trying to think back to some of our conversation before. Nancy and Scott will lead you there. But know that that's kind of the trajectory of our meeting today. Also, how it's situated within the timeline of what we have left in January. It's going very quickly. And so your charge today is really to think about what you as a subcommittee would like to recommend, formal recommendation for the end of this meeting. So with that, I'll see if there are any questions before I hand it over. Yes, Dale?
I have a question that probably helped me overall thinking through this student-centered funding. If you'll go to the slide that says nurses for a second.
Sure.
You were on there just a second ago.
Yep. This one.
Okay, so help me understand, just for nurses, it says at the recommended ratio. If we're talking about and please stop me, Jamie, if I'm off track here, but my understanding is as a part of a base that there will be a dollar amount that would apply to every student in Tennessee that would generate a dollar amount for a nurse. Okay, and so then I saw in the information that you all had provided that speaks to going back to BEP review committee kind of language, and kind of what Tara had said earlier about, we need to get away from the district type of formula, just thinking about the student-centered funding. I'm trying to get there, but I'm having a difficult time logically how to get there. And I'm just trying to use nurses to help me understand. Okay. So if I'm at a school that has 100 students, and when I look at what has been presented so far and across the state of Tennessee, it's been pretty overwhelming that everybody says every student should have a nurse at their school. So if that is the case, then I think about a student-centered funding formula. And if I'm a student and I'm in a school of 100 students, would you not take what a nurse would cost and divide that by 100? And if that is the mathematical formula, would you not use that same formula if you had a school of 1,000 students?
So I think that probably goes into, and this was a conversation yesterday in our teacher advisory committee as well, subcommittee, is that some of these tend to also fall into this conversation about weighting and flexibility. So that's something today to really think about. So, for example, yesterday the conversation got down to nitty gritties. We literally on our recommendation list, we suggested ratios. This is the moment to do it. So, and then it was school level versus district level. And then the conversation about what is the flexibility? So if a school already has it funded, so the commissioner, Nancy, you hop in anytime here as well. The commissioner was chatting with us a couple of days ago, one day last week. So for example, if a school already funds a principal and that ends up on the list, right, as a recommended resource, they already fund a principal. Does that mean that they don't get that money? Nope, that just means they reallocate. However, for those school districts that don't have a principal, it's a great opportunity to fund a principal. So the flexibility, which is right up here, maintain flexibility. So, and maybe I'm not hearing you right, Dale, and if I'm not, you correct me. But if the nurses that I see that kind of as the same way as the principal. If it's needed, do you have to use it? Is that what you're asking? Or okay.
No, that's not what I'm asking.
Okay.
What I'm asking is to generate a dollar amount for a student to receive services of a nurse. And if it comes across through all of this work that's been done, that every student should at least have one nurse in their school. What dollar amount do you put on that child as far as what they generate for receiving the services of a nurse?
All right, I see. That's clear. Okay.
And I think that's a very simple question that needs a simple answer. At least it does in my simple mind.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll definitely shoot that one up the flagpole for you.
And there may be people here on this call today that can help somehow logically make me think through this. Anybody
out there?
Well, I want to tag team Dale here just a little bit on the nursing and quality. I understand his question completely, and that's, I think, why we're in business with these committees is the funding per student for the nurse allocation at Science Hill with 2,000 students is different than Grassy Fork with 85 students. And that's why the funding would need to be more per student at Grassy Fork. That would be one of the many components of that funding per child. But what I wanted to add to that was, let's not forget quality that comes on from the online healthcare, which is extremely cost effective and sometimes free. We have, and I mentioned this in the last meeting, I believe, we have over 100 schools that chime into Niswonger Children's Hospital to either have a nurse practitioner or a doc on the other line, helping that nurse and faculty and staff, the availability of faculty and staff to that, which would improve the quality of the experience, the educational experience, and minimize downtime for everyone involved, including parents that may have to go get a kid or may not if they're hooked into telemedicine. And I'd like to have that as a footnote or bracket around nursing, after nursing, that we consider that, since there's almost no cost to that.
Hey y'all, this is Tara. I kind of want to reinforce what Scott was saying in regards to telehealth, because I think that it allows us to open up a different level of conversation about what's available to all communities, regardless of where they are. But I also, and I do understand Dale's concern and question about the student-based formula as it ties to these more broad-based positions. And but Jamie, I think you had a really good point about how you're thinking about the principal. However, principal can't be virtual, but things like, or people like nurses or social workers or other individuals like that, or skills like that can be provided in a virtual environment. So it allows us a lot more flexibility of who might be able to service the students.
Yeah, and I'm not, and let me be clear, I'm not suggesting that this is in place of a nurse. This is in addition to, again, to minimize the amount of time a child may need to be out of school. A teacher can go through this, pick up a prescription after the school day, that sort of thing. I've just watched this evolve in these 100 school districts up here, and the amount of use that it gets. and the amount of time that's saved is extraordinary. But and please forgive my lack of knowledge on the subject, but following up on Dale's his example and his equation of why that student, why the amount of funding per student would be higher using the nursing example in a small school. I mean, that would be true of teachers that may not exist today. That 100-person school may not have the funding today for some of the basic educational needs that we may want to add into that. Again, back to our formula, why that child or that school may need, $3,000 a kid, and I'm picking numbers out of thin air just for example, and the kid at Science Hill, state would be paying $2,000 a kid. I mean, if we're trying to put learning on an equal basis, whether you're rural, small, or large, or metro, those things need to be considered, Jamie, and maybe we're way down that line.
And we will be addressing some of that too as we look at the weighted nature of this too, and that after we get through the base discussion here in a few moments. So you're exactly right. We're not going to read this statement. If you'd like to report me on that, that will be just fine. But I believe everybody knows it, and we're going to keep moving. I believe everyone's going to be giving their very best to that. I wanted to get us quickly on to the discussion around those key buckets that Jamie was talking about a few minutes ago, and thinking about looking at base, looking at weight, looking at those additional dollars, looking at outcomes, and then other categories that we would want to include. And we really need to move through all of those today. So I'm going to be a little bit of a taskmaster as we're working through this, knowing that a lot of the questions we're going to have may not have answer today, but the important thing is getting these items in that we really have interest in knowing that they are going to be considered. I've been on several calls related to this in the last couple of weeks, and already it's around, we're getting, the conversation is around, we're hearing a lot about this topic or this topic. And so it really impressed me to know that I have to push this committee to be sure that the items you want to have in this discussion are in this discussion. And so, Jamie, if we'll move to the base, and think about this for a moment. So we have items that are considered here, but what we want you to do is to think with us for a few moments. Things that we want as a committee to make the statement that they do need to be considered. We may still have concerns about the ratio with which they are provided and how that funding is going to work. But today, at a minimum, we need to know that we've taken a stand on the items that you want to be sure are considered in that discussion. Does that make sense to everyone? And Jamie, have I said that? Do you think that will help us to kick off that discussion? So nurses, I'm hearing, and I'm just going to go out on a limb and say I'm hearing that we all are, I'm hearing some general agreement that as a committee, we have concern about the fact that students have access to nursing care. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm seeing Ben's head shaking there. All right, so Jamie, talk to us. This is the first official one that we would be sending forward to that list that you're going to be keeping for us. How do you need us to proceed? Because I also heard a few moments ago that putting it into the must-haves or the should-haves or whatever is not really the goal of today. Is that correct?
Right. So it really is still kind of getting down into the real specifics about what this subcommittee sees as must-haves right here in the base. And this bulleted list are the ones that are kind of already out there. And so if you want to, one, add additional to this list, adding any additional, or two, get more specific on any of the ones that are already here. So for example, in yesterday's subcommittee, as I was saying earlier, they got down to the nitty gritty with ratios with nurses. They got down to the nitty gritty with teacher salaries. So if you really want to get specific with these, fine. Or if you feel like there are others to add to the list, we can as well. Does that help?
That helps a great deal. Thank you.
Nancy, some of our, oh, sorry.
I have a clarifying question. On the second bullet here, it says counselors. How are we defining counselors? Are those college and career counselors? Are they emotional counselors? Are they something else? That seems to be a constant question in most of these conversations.
And I think that's a very good question, Tara, because that's exactly what this committee needs to dig into. What do we want that to be?
I mean, I would vote for college and career counselors, but that's me.
So on the list, you would literally say college and career counselor or trauma-informed professional. So go ahead and separate those out.
Guidance counselors will be included.
We can separate that out. Mm-hmm.
You know, we have, I think we brought this up before, and I'm not really selling for the foundation, but we got plenty to do, but I am selling for the concept on what we call advisors that are near peers that go in and assist what we used to call guidance counselors back in my day. But that program exists. There's one that exists by the state, funded by the state, with professionals that don't get the traction. I mean, the data speaks for itself that we get with the near peers that have just graduated with a degree in counseling from Carson Newman or something like that. That level of support and the achievement that has come from having those advisors is almost a rounding error to what we're talking about here in total, to blanket the entire state with advisors. So I would like to separate the word counselor from advisor, and at some level then you have further discussion about what I'm talking about.
So I think I'm hearing.
You want to clean that up?
No, I think I'm hearing the distinction between college and career advising versus the term guidance counselor that can certainly be a lot deeper, dealing with personal issues and family guidance and those types of things. Is that what I think that I'm hearing?
Yeah.
This is Dale. This probably doesn't help to clarify anything. It probably just makes it a little bit more muddy. But you said something earlier on nurses that I think we almost, I almost think of, social, emotional well-being of students would need to be, we think of that sometimes with counselors. I think that's what Tara's saying there. And Scott, make sure we kind of, but maybe we can think of some mental health with nursing component.
And Dale, adding that mental health piece, that might be really helpful in this process. So big distinction between college and career advising and mental health assistance.
And I would also agree with what Ben had put in the chat. I think recommending school safety, such as SROs, and I think I would echo that.
And that's one thing that's outside the funding formula right now, that, you know, the school safety grant, that including that. And I think SROs, yes, but when you talk about school safety, think more holistically. We're not just talking about SROs. We could be talking about a number of safety, whether it's facility safety, SROs. There's a number of things that come into play when you talk about safety. And I think that's just a must-have. I would say it needs to be in the base.
Yeah, we heard a lot about that in our sessions with teachers in particular. So I would say amen to that. The other issue that's not even represented here is around transportation. That how do you have access to some of these opportunities if the transportation's not available in any means? And then a question around technology sustainability. What does that mean? Because we had lots of conversations about technology access and what that looks like, but what do we mean there on this list?
So if you all can see, somebody let me know that you can see my whole screen at this point. So thumbs up. Okay, so I've just pulled up the document that I'm working on, and as you all talk, I'm typing, and then we can whittle this list down or get more specific as we go. But I'm just dropping it in as it happens, and you all let me know if you see a clarification. If just say, Jamie, stick it up here instead of here. You just guide me, okay?
Jamie, this is Bill.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
One other thing before, I'm sure Beth and JC will bring it up, but I think it's very, very important. It's not in our current formula right now, but I certainly think needs to be a part of the base is professional development of our teachers. And I think that needs to be included in the base.
Mm-hmm.
What about pre-K, a universal pre-K sort of concept? Is that something we have of interest in looking at the early childhood piece, or no?
I think that would be included in your, as you structure it. If this is K through 12, then you're in K through 12. If you want to make it pre-K through 12, then that's a whole different animal.
Yeah.
There has been a conversation about pre-K, particularly as it relates to, is it, do we have 3-year-olds? Do we start at 4? So how specific do you want to get to it? Who does teach pre-K? Does it need to be just trained or trained and certified? There's some of the conversations that even popped up in other subcommittees.
This is Beth. So several things that I had notes on have already been stated, but I want to go back to Ben's comments in the chat box because some of it's been captured in the notes, some of it's not. Ben made a really good point. There are certain things that are currently unfunded mandates, such as interventionists and RTI, that I don't see captured here as being needed. I think that's absolutely something that has to be in the base, particularly as we think about overcoming the disruption to student learning caused by the pandemic. And as we think about the focus on literacy. And I also want to go back and hit the social worker piece because, and again, this might be splitting hairs to some people, but college and career counselors, mental health counselors, school psychologists, and social workers are all very, very different things. And when we think about some of the challenges that our students are experiencing that are impacting their ability to be successful in a school setting are things that need to be addressed by social workers. So I think it's important that those are added, and I appreciate Ben mentioning them.
Thank you, Beth. Great comments. Others we want added to this list?
The one thing I've been looking at and had a question on, going through all the public comment, teachers do a very important job in our classroom, but there's also a number of support staff that support the work in the classroom. Do we want to include in the base support staff? And I'm talking about everything from your normal teacher aide to your special education support staff, those support staff that directly interact with students day to day. I'm not necessarily talking about administrative staff. I'm talking about the actual teachers' aides, special education aides, those personnel that are in the classroom with the teachers. I think
Paraprofessionals.
And I would like JC and Beth's opinion, as far as the teacher doing the job, having that support.
Yeah. No, we agree, Ben, and I think the paraprofessionals, woefully underpaid. I think we talked to some in Coffee County that were being paid basically $13 an hour. So yes, it should be included. And also we include other support personnel, school secretaries, whole deal. So I think you have to have both instructional and non-instructional personnel included in that. So we support that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the pandemic and some of the staffing shortages that we've seen, particularly this academic year, have demonstrated just how necessary both our instructional education support professionals and our non-instructional folks, our cafeteria workers, our transportation providers, all of those folks are critical to making sure that our students are able to access an public education. And so I definitely agree that those salaries need to be included in the base.
And back to Dale's point earlier, professional development, paraprofessionals are one of those categories that we often fall short in providing them the professional development that they need and deserve in their work as well. So I would want to include that there also.
And before we move away from this paraprofessional piece, I think it might be a place to talk about substitute educators as well, because I know that is a challenge that districts are experiencing right now. And part of the problem is that folks can't afford to work as substitute educators because the pay is so low.
So Beth, this is Dale, question. I mean, and maybe not necessary to just you, Beth, but you brought it up, which I think helps me trying to think through this process. Would you see that a student would generate, every student in Tennessee, as a part of the base, would generate a certain dollar amount for the number of, let's say, substitute teacher days that their teacher has? I mean, is there a dollar amount that goes on this student weight? Jamie, that might be for you or whatever, but I know, like what Beth is saying, for us in Hamlin to get certified teachers, we had to pay, and this is 6 years ago, I guess now, $100 a day, where a neighboring system is like $40 a day. So the question is, how does this work in this formula, Jamie?
Yep, that's the question I have going in. It's already gone in.
You can't have the question. I've got the question. You've got to have the answer.
I'm going to get you the answer. I do have an answer about the draft. This is the same draft that legislators will be using. So I have that one already. So back to the list, I'm going to push you all just a moment to think about. So I'm just kind of coding and categorizing as we go. And currently I have this under staffing. Please, at any point in time, tell me you feel like it fits under something. There's a different heading for this, or is it salaries for staffing? How specific do you want to get here? Now's the time. So I'm typing as you talk. So you guide me. If you need me to add something to be clearer, more specific, now's the time.
I would say at a minimum, when you're looking at some of these nurses, social workers, psychologists, you need an SRO. You need one of those individuals in just about every school. I couldn't think of a situation where you necessarily wouldn't. Now, as far as back to the Science Hill example of then you have, what about schools with more students, I think that may be where you got a base of one funded for every school, and then you come in with a ratio to say, if you're above that, above a certain number, you get so many more. I don't see why it couldn't be that approach either. I mean, if we're creating it, we can create it how we see fit. But at least getting at least one of some of these individuals in every school in the base, I think would be important.
Okay, so some additional commentary there from the rest of the group.
We agree. And I want to go back, Jamie, on one other thing. Since we've also touched on substitute teachers and we've also touched on professional development, one of the things we've discovered is that substitute teachers really lack professional development. They don't know school system rules, laws. They get thrown into a situation. We're bringing warm bodies in to sit in a classroom. A lot of times they've so I would also include some professional development for our substitute teachers and our paraprofessionals. So that also has to be included. I think if you're going to really look at it, so we'll do that. And then Jamie, one other thing that I've struggled with, and Dale alluded to it a little bit, and as he struggled with the very first question, I struggled with a bigger question. How is the BEP not a child-centered funding model? If they're not in the classroom, Dale, if they're not sitting in the classroom, are you going to get paid?
Well, JC, I'm kind of agree with you, but I've moved on past that thought. I'm with you. I mean, because it really is, but I'm just trying to move on past that, and I get where you're coming from, because there's a lot of things in our current formula that actually are based on the number of students that you serve. So, but I understand.
We're outnumbered. All right.
While we're looking at those personnel issues too, and I think Ben, you, Dale, and some others will be much better at defining this than I can, but is there also an issue that we need to consider here about ensuring that schools do have, that school systems are funded so that they can have a principal in every school? Because that is also an issue too, I believe, isn't it, Ben?
Principal and assistant principal, and it's actually, I think, a bigger issue in your rural districts, because when you look at the current model as it sits right now, you have to hit a certain threshold in a school to be funded for that principal or assistant principal. And I mean, you look at the reports that have been released. The level of principal you have has a direct influence on student achievement, and that's data we could point to. So I think making sure that we are supporting districts to have a good principal and assistant principal in there will directly, if you're looking for something to directly impact student achievement, well, there's data to support that a principal will do that. So I think including it in the base would be important.
I would totally agree with what Ben said, and Nancy, thank you for bringing that up. I think the biggest issue here is not the principal, but of course the principal is extremely important. But I think, as Ben alluded to, in our current formula, it's the assistant principal, because that's where we're woefully underfunded. And, I think it's important when we look down, Jamie said getting the nitty gritty, but I just get down to the root, the root cause of why we have assistant principals now from when we've all been to school has really changed. And assistant principals are critical for the success of teachers in classrooms, for students in schools. The role that they play, in evaluations and making sure that things are taken care of for students is critical. And right now, if you don't have a school of 600 students, you're funded zero for assistant principals by the state of Tennessee. So that 600 just needs to go away, and we need to get whatever dollar amount that Jamie's going to work on getting this for students to have a principal and assistant principals based on the size of the school, for sure. But yeah, assistant principals are where districts are hammered right now in our current formula. That really needs to improve.
Thank you. All right, before we leave base, not that we can't come back to that one if something else comes to mind, but before we leave the topic of the base, any others that you want to be sure we have included?
Nancy, I apologize, but I just want to go on record here and the documents that I've seen from the department that I went through, Jamie, and you may help me here with this. It says, and I think you're trying to get to what I'm trying to say and what Ben was saying, I guess, about a principal and or assistant principal, but I'm saying that's not good enough. That, a principal for sure in every school, but there are certain size schools that need more than one assistant principal. And whatever that, one assistant principal per school is not good enough for our kids in Tennessee. That's important.
And then Jamie, one more thing. Before we go salaries, we're doing that, including that in the base. You had salaries and benefits for those people, making sure benefits are included.
So does it make sense to do it here?
I don't know, but it's in the document on the page you have, and I want to make sure we haven't mentioned that, but benefits are a huge enticement and a looming teacher shortage. So I want to make sure we're addressing benefits as well, and the staffing.
Okay.
So,
and we're not talking about dollars here, right? Because I would say competitive salaries and benefits if we are.
We agree.
I like that.
Say that one more time for me. I'm sorry.
I just said that we should, if we're talking about staffing, it should say competitive salaries and benefits. It'd be just my only input there.
Can I ask a question for you and for the whole group? When we talk about competitive, who are we trying to compete with?
I think there's two ways to look at that. Are you looking at strictly education, so the southeastern region and the other states, or are you looking at just the current average salary for a college graduate in the private workforce? Which one are you looking at?
I think that is just such a fundamental question that we ought to answer in our state, in our great state of Tennessee. What is it that we want for kids in our classrooms? Because we know a teacher is the most important thing. So what are we trying to compete with? And I think that is our teacher shortage and where we are right now today. Folks, we're in dire straits. We are in dire straits, and we've got to be able to attract people in the classroom, and we need to be able to go out, whether they're an accountant, whether they're looking to go into law. We ought to be able to attract the best and brightest to our education field in Tennessee. I mean, Ben, I'm with you. That's a fundamental question we should answer if we're going to change the funding formula of our state.
Yeah, Dale, I was just about to jump in when you did. Competitive versus professional, I think is where it is for me, because who are we competing with versus are we providing a professional wage that's comparable to other similarly educated professionals across the spectrum of jobs.
So in yesterday's subcommittee meeting, it even got down to specific salary. So starting salary should be no less than blank.
Than a correction worker. So I think correction workers should get paid, but so starting salary for a correction worker in the state is now $45,000. Starting salary for teachers should be a little bit above that because they have a degree.
I have, I guess, 3 teachers in the family, either children or daughter-in-laws. And I'm often reminded that they're in the classroom plus, 10 other days a year and making $45,000 a year, a good deal of time off, while my youngest son is with one of our companies. He gets 3 weeks a year, but he gets twice the pay. So at some point, we have to think about, and maybe this goes back into the benefit side of teaching, is you pretty much got your summers to yourself. And I know that isn't something that folks like to talk about, but it is in fact true. So I'm back to Dale's, I guess. I don't have an answer for this one, but I'm back to Dale. What are we comparing? What do we want to compare a teacher to?
So Scott, I think your comments are spot on. Beth, JC, I see you shaking your head. I shake my head there too. But here's what I would say to all of us is that thought is out there. A teacher signs a contract for 200 days. And you know, when we look at other, you know, JC, you brought up, I think, correctional officer. You know, when they sign a contract, how many days do they sign a contract? The teachers do work a whole lot more than 200 days. But I guess changing the contract then, if that's the case, do we expect teachers to work more? And if we do, then let's change the contract from 200 days. And that's what they did. That's what you all did this summer. I mean, this summer you worked for 2 more months. You got paid for it. But I think we ought to look at the time that teachers are actually contracted for when we talk about salaries and benefits. And you sign a contract to work for 200 days. And maybe that needs to change. But I think this is a great time to have these conversations.
Yeah, and Dale, I'll take you up on one piece of that. But the problem with most of these other jobs, they go home and they're done. They work the 8-hour shift, the 10-hour shift. Correction workers, because I've talked to some of them, they say, well, we do 12-hour shifts 3 days a week or whatever. Okay. Teachers, it's not a 5-day week, 40-hour week job. It is you're there, like the teacher said yesterday on television. She's there in the parking lot at 6:30 in the morning with her kids in the car, and she's leaving at 7 at night. So if you're going to compensate it, you're right. I mean, let's make sure we're including the hours that they're working and putting all those hours together. So it's not just days that you're contracted. You also got to include the hours. And I would argue that some teachers would trade dollars for less hours. And I think that's, you know, they would want some help and lower student teacher ratio and some other aspects like that, but that's not what we're here for. But definitely the salary has got to be commensurate with the work that they're doing.
And of course, we're talking college graduates. Our base at the companies is 247 days a year. And if you've got a degree and you're working in one of those companies, you're not working 8 hours, believe me. It's a lot more than that as well.
So would it be fair to say that the staffing section up at the top feels comfortable to everyone? Any changes need to be made?
The only question I asked you, Jamie, what's competitive? Who are we competing against?
Yep, I do have an answer to your question, Dale. So districts are completing a questionnaire to inform those dollar amounts, and it's due January 7th.
Well, what question did that answer?
The one about how do we generate the amount per student? Right at the top of the menu.
Let me re-ask my question then.
Do you mind at all can you type that one in the chat so I have it verbatim? Do you mind to do that?
Okay.
Thank you.
Jamie, I think to Dale's question, I guess I have a question like, do we have any data about how other states have dealt with the staffing issue as they redefine their student funding formulas?
I haven't, it's been a minute since I read through it. It was before Christmas, but I do believe there is information in the resources in the January folder.
Great. Okay.
I will double check for us.
Maybe we can all take a look at that before our next meeting.
Yeah.
The K-12 funding formula overview and case studies, if you look, for example, in Ohio, they list the statewide average teacher salary at $65,500. So in these case studies, there are references to teacher salaries in those states. So just FYI, if you're looking, you don't have to dig through everything, that it's in there.
Thank you, Van. Quality professional development for teachers, subs, parapros. Do we have any specifics for technology?
Now, what does that actually mean? Are we talking about hardware, software in schools? Or can we add a block there again for AP access for all that comes down to a per seat, per student cost? What does technology mean?
I'm right there with you. I'm asking the same question.
Okay.
And in our groups, there were questions around just the technology at the school and within the classroom and the connection back to what students had at home to ensure continuity. So, again, asking that question of is the base expectation for technology within a district?
See, and I see it as you have the devices, then you have to buy software to ensure that only certain materials can access, certain individuals can access the device and students can't access certain materials. So there's a software piece, then there's a piece of just having an expert there, making sure it all works.
Maintenance.
Yeah. I mean, I think this kind of goes back to Jamie. I think the department really needs to look at what school districts right now are spending on technology. What is their technology budget right now? And I'm talking about a lot of personnel to make sure that kids are staying safe while they're online, providing lots of those types of trainings for students too. And so, I mean, knowing what is being spent right now, not necessarily at the state level, but overall, I think it would be eye-opening for lots of folks looking at school funding. There's a lot of money going into that.
So if we're thinking about it in terms of a recommended list of resources for this funding formula, is there anything we would like to say about technology? Is it that there is, a base amount for basic technology cost?
I think there should be a basic for the hardware and the software. I think about my two kids and the devices they have. They will get on the software from the school that, their games, for instance, they incorporate math and reading skills, and they're learning while they're doing all that, and they really enjoy it, and they don't even realize they're learning. And the districts use that. Accelerated reader, reading a number of books, and those are simple things that we kind of skip over. But I know for my two young kids, a second grader and a fourth grader, they spend a whole lot of time, and it's really beneficial for them, especially when it comes to reading.
I have a question, and you think I've probably completely lost my mind at this point, but isn't the librarian of the future an IT specialist? And I guess the question that just ran through my mind pretty randomly, as you might imagine, is in today's library, when we're replacing librarians, wouldn't that be somebody that's focused on IT? Or am I off the planet here, off the grid?
Scott, this is Dale. I would tell you my past experiences have been, I hope you don't say that to a school librarian. But I think you are right on several areas. Like in our high schools, we had computer stations where librarians became computer experts because they had to.
Right.
But we had a whole team of IT experts too that were not school librarians. So I think the school librarian has probably had to change a whole lot more than the IT folks. The IT folks have kind of grown into their jobs. But I don't, at one time I thought maybe our librarians would go away, but I don't see that now. I see them having to change and adapt more than just a school librarian becoming an IT specialist.
Yeah.
I
was just thinking of duplicative efforts in the future.
And most
You know,
schools
like-
need kind of a geek squad, that are working on the individual devices and making sure that they're running, that the kids are using and teachers are using. And that's something totally different.
Well, and I think it
And I
also,
can tell you,
I think it
that's
also,
extreme.
Scott's point is, working on the assumption that all schools have a librarian, and we have multiple districts in our state that don't have a single librarian. I worked for 17 years in one of those. We don't have any librarians. So I don't think you can count on that either.
So quick question for clarification. On the list, is there a space for IT personnel in technology? Is that considered a must-have? That's in the base.
Well, when you think about technology sustainability, and of course, I don't know how the person who initially stated that was defining it, but I think of sustainability of technology immediately in two ways. And one of those, Jamie, is to your point. It is keeping the technology you have in effective running order and safely running that technology. That is sustaining the technology. But then I also think about it from the replacement standpoint. In my previous life, I worked in an environment where every 3 years we knew that there would be a turnover of computer, and those computers would be changed because we were ensuring the sustainability of those computers across the campus. So I see that 2 points is sustaining replacements that are necessary, but then also what do you do to really ensure the quality running order of what you have and make it last as long as you can? Does that make sense?
So Nancy, if I put IT personnel.
All of that goes back to your IT personnel, I believe.
Okay.
Well, and I think if we're just looking at, 21st century technology and creating a classroom and a graduate that has the skills to succeed, that plays a huge part.
It does, absolutely.
I would just call it hardware, software, and infrastructure.
I think that's perfect, Dale.
So now we're at the place where we either want to get into the conversation around pre-K intervention RTI. We can move on to weights and direct funding. We can move on, or we can stay right here. It's completely up to you all.
So with this new formula, and Jamie, you probably don't have any idea of the answer to my question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So if our formula changes, and let's say pre-K is not included, right now there are still dollars out there for state pre-K. Will that still be there? And let me finish. The question was, Nancy, you asked the question about pre-K. Our superintendents, I will tell you, across our entire state, we were charging them by asking that question. Their biggest concern about pre-K is having the infrastructure to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
If we would love to have pre-K, as superintendents across the state have passionately said to me, but they've also said, Dale, we don't have space for that. If we do that, then we're going to have to build on classrooms, and so that has to be considered too. So I would say to you, from Tulsa's perspective, we would want to include pre-K, but only if the physical capacity of improvement of dollars for physical classrooms could be considered. And if that's not, then we certainly hope the state pre-K program will continue as is.
Right.
And I've also heard a lot of conversation about, back to the nursing discussion we had earlier, but the idea of partnership in relation to that too, and community partners who would work on the pre-K side as well. Churches and other, in other community-based pre-Ks. So that's also been a discussion I've heard. But it's back to that fundamental question of if literacy is a major concern of ours, if numeracy is a major concern of ours, then the earlier we can get to the child and help them with that, the more likely we're going to be successful. So that was my main reason for just mentioning that.
Excuse me.
So there are some federal funds available that the state may choose to take, and it's to support like a short-term funding of one-time short-term funding 5-year for VPK. So I think the conversation really is the idea for it to stay the same as it is right now. Ages 3 to 4, those are specifics that we can get into later, or other subgroups we'll get into. At this point, it's whether or not volunteer pre-K really rests on your list of recommendations, and then we can move forward.
Jamie, I would say pull it at this point. I think I'm a voice of one, and I think we need to pull that and keep moving.
Okay.
Hey, Nancy, though, I appreciate you bringing it up, and the real importance of early literacy. And I hope that, comes through in our recommendations. And
Absolutely.
And do remember that once that draft comes out, it is a conglomeration of all subcommittee recommendations. So there'll still be an opportunity to look at some of the things that may not end up on your all's list. So what about intervention and RTI? Talk about that today or move forward?
So I do have a question. Because when we're talking about interventionists and RTI specialists, those are our staff positions. Is there some reason that would not be listed under the staffing piece?
Nope, that's
at the top of
a good
this?
point. Yep, I'll move it right up there.
We know that it's required. It's not currently funded. And so I would assert that this definitely has to be included in the base.
Yeah, it had just come out as an individual comment earlier, but I agree with you 100%. Slide it on it.
Thank you.
Sure thing. So at this point, I think we could possibly move on to weights. So I'm going to move the slide down.
hey, Jamie,
Yes.
I had a question about how long this conversation is going to take, because I know some people had blocked off the 11:30 to 12:30, and I think it's a really important conversation. So I'm just wondering, do we have time to really effectively address it, at this meeting? So
Yep.
happy
So
to add a meeting or whatever we need to do.
yep, I'll hand that one over to Nancy.
Yes, at our last meeting, we talked about the fact that we knew this was going to run long, that not everyone could probably stay with it, but we hoped that those who would stay with it for the length of time they could. So if you can hang on with us for a little while, we would greatly appreciate that.
I do have a hard stop at 11:45, but I can try to push it a little bit. But I want to make sure we have time to really address this next category. So, but we can certainly get a head start on it. So,
Thank you.
So here are the weighted categories that continue to get the narrowed focus. You'll see unique learning needs. Underneath each of those, you'll see ED, students with disabilities and gifted, English learners, and dyslexia. You'll see rural, sparsity, and charter enrollment. So the question is, are there other areas that you would like to add weights for here beyond this list? And if so, we'll add those in. Or if there is more specificity on one of these, we can do that as well.
So first, what's missing?
I just want to bring up the foster and homeless. Those are federal categories that districts are required to address, and there are certain things districts have to do and services they have to provide to those students. So I mean, just from that perspective, and from just the perspective of the student, those students need additional support in a number of ways.
Excellent point, thank you.
And Ben, it is well, ELL is also there, included in federal Title I supports as well, correct?
Yeah, so
it would not become a separate state-funded category.
There are some federal funds, but there are also some state requirements. And while you do get federal funds, I would suggest keeping it in the weights, just because of the additional things that have to happen at a local level that the federal funds just won't cover. Just like your students with disabilities, the feds only cover a small percentage of that, and most is picked up by locals.
So is there a time limit on this? So federal dollars, it only goes for so long.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I think for English learners, for instance, there would be a time limit of they have to pass certain assessment, and I'd have to go back and look, but I think they have to pass certain assessments to move out of the EL category. If a student exits the foster category or the homeless category, then obviously they wouldn't fall into that category. But for the time they are into that category, extra support to meet those needs.
So would the state mirror the federal requirements?
Not, for instance, JC, like on ELL,
Right.
the state requirements are and what the federal requirements are two different things. Okay. And so, for instance, like what Tennessee has adopted could be different than what other states have adopted. And the test, WIDA, is the test that you actually take, and you, whether you're a T1 or T2, all these different levels of services. What superintendents had advocated for in this funding formula, that ELL looked more like special education, depending on the amount of time and services that a student had to have. And that actually, I think, came from down in Southeast, I believe, JC. But
and I think that's what that's what I was getting at.
Yeah, I mean, so I think our services to our students who are receiving special ELL should mirror kind of what we're doing in special ed under an IEP, depending on the amount of intense services that these students have to have. And we don't do that in our current formula right now for EL. So
I looked at this, Dale, at the numbers, and as I recall, in Metro Nashville alone, it was like 50 something different language groups in 2017. Today, there's 130 different groups in being served by Metro Nashville Public Schools. And I mean, that's a pretty deep area. So we need to really look at that very carefully and make sure that we're meeting the needs of the child, but also making sure that we're hitting the federal requirements. So that's kind of what we're saying. So just making sure that we're clear on that one.
I have a question too. Just like we have a consideration for waiting on schools with concentrated poverty, should there be consideration for schools that have concentrated English language learners?
I think that's a great idea. And I think yeah, it's a great idea.
So you're saying in addition to the weighted formula for English learners, right?
Yeah.
In addition, you're talking
Yeah.
more about where there's concentration of ELL populations,
Yeah,
right?
and we have,
Uh-huh.
yeah, Teresa, we have schools where we have that concentration.
Right.
And
So do
there's,
we, right.
yeah, it just needs added resources to work that school in a different way because of the concentration.
Right. Right.
I would advocate and agree to that. Absolutely.
I do have a question when I was reviewing the materials for this meeting, and I apologize that I missed last month. I was very ill. I tried to go back and watch the video, but the wrong video was uploaded for meeting 3. Can somebody please tell me under weights what the intent is behind charter enrollment? That was not self-evident to me.
That was a question for me too, Beth. Thank you for raising it.
So that's come up quite a few times this week. So basically, we already do have funding for public charters. And so it would be in addition to what's already there. That is the only clarification that we've received at this point, but we have asked for further information.
So Jamie, is that to create more parity, with local district funding related to facilities and special needs supports? Do we think that was what I
hesitate to answer, but see where you're going. Yeah.
Can you explain that to me a little bit more? Because I need to know a little bit more about that before I could give that. I mean, not that my thumbs up matters or not, but before I could support that one, I'm gonna have to learn a lot more about that one, because it looks to me like a student who is in a public school or a public charter school. I'm trying to figure this out. So help me understand that a little bit more. Or maybe you can't, you just need to get us more information on that, Jamie.
I do.
Okay.
I do. We're all looking for further guidance there.
That'd be great, Jamie. Thanks.
Sure. So anything else that you feel like needs to go in the weights section as an addition? Currently have foster and homeless and a concentration of English learners beyond the weight that's already listed.
I was looking at some of the other states and what they do. They have some individual weighting for the number of students in CTE. I know with Carl Perkins, the most recent Carl Perkins, based on the number of concentrators will determine a lot of your funding. Should we do something weighted for the number of students in CTE? Because, I mean, CTE classrooms, you're talking about machinery, equipment, you're talking about a specialized teacher potentially. I'm throwing that out there to get any thoughts on it.
Oh, good point.
So additional dollars does
of
have
CTE more broadly than just CTE. You have kind of going over to the additional dollars. Yeah,
Right.
You have innovative high school and middle school CTE, but if students are enrolled in some of those programs, generating some additional funding. I mean, I'm trying to
saying here it shows up in our additional dollars section, but basically what you're asking is there a place, just as we see here with EL, to weight based on a concentration?
It could be a concentration, or it could be just each student generates an amount if they're enrolled in a CTE, work-based learning,
So currently, our formula right now is if you are in a CTE class, you earn a teacher when you have 20 students in that class. Okay, so you cannot go over that 20. So a school district generates more dollars the more kids they have in that CTE class. Class size is in our state law, and this is going to be very important that when we think about our formula, other states don't have this. Ohio has it at K through 3, I think, and that's it. But currently our law says our class size is what it is. And CTE generates more dollars to take care of those things that Ben said, simply because you have fewer kids in the classroom than you do at other in other high school programs. So that's important that we keep those CTE classes small for sure. But I'm not sure how that's going to work with a funding formula that if a student is in a CTE class, is that how they generate money? Or, I mean, all that is a very simple, fundamental question that I have to have answered before I can think through this.
Yeah.
Are y'all following me on that? If a student is in a CTE class, do they generate more dollars because of this weight? If they're in 2, do they generate more dollars? Or does a class have to be a certain, I mean, that's a kind of a simple, fundamental question that I have to think through that I have to know the answer to before I can even attempt to try to think about what Ben's saying.
So if you look at the slide that's here, part of the outcomes section, we also have like work-based learning, that kind of stuff. So that is also considered as a potential part of the new funding formula. So I think there is kind of a through line between them.
Well, the flip side of that is not to penalize a district either. So if you have a district that is solely focused on, they have a great work-based learning program, but they don't offer a lot of AP courses, you don't want to penalize that district. They're still offering options for their students. And I think this goes back to the flexibility. You've got to have that flexibility there for the district to, let's take the Ford site. Those districts have to have the flexibility to implement programs that align with the workforce in the region they're in and the needs of the workforce in that region versus another portion of the state. So you don't want to get into a position where you're penalizing districts for pursuing certain things over others either.
So the outcomes are for the districts, but not the students. But it's a student-centered formula. So I'm trying to understand, like on an AP course, go back to what Ben said on an AP course. Would a school district generate more money based on the number of kids that pass an AP test?
I think this is your place to talk about it, or at least some recommendations.
But what about a student that takes a CLEP exam and gets college credit that way? It's still college credit whether they pass the AP exam or the CLEP exam. So if the district has a program in place to allow students to take CLEP exam, and I know some districts are doing that as an alternative. So
I have a question for you to think through. So I'm curious to know, and feel free to push back. I'm curious to know if some of the conversation we're starting to get into at this point is more in like meeting 5 and 6, where we're looking at, well, actually probably 6, we're really looking at policy considerations. And as Dale said, I use the nitty gritty, and is this space today more of like, here's the big chunk that we're saying we recommend prior to getting into the weeds.
Well, and I understand Dale's point. It's hard to address the question if you don't know that
right
ahead of time. And because I'm looking at rural, and And that's one very concerning to me. I can say, yes, we need definitely to have some weights for rural communities because there are particular challenges. But how we define that using the federal definition of rural is pretty much of little or no help to some of our school districts. When Unicoi County is considered rural, because they're within 15 miles of Johnson City, which is its own school district, that's of little help to Unicoi County to be, so, and probably one of the most rural communities we have in our state. So those are really deep questions, and Jamie, to your point, I don't know the answer to that. But I know that at some point, the kinds of discussions that Dale and Ben were having, the discussion around rural, those have to be addressed in order to be able to make this thing work.
Yep.
Well, and that's kind of the concern about, I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but with the outcomes, the policy, kind of what you were talking about in meetings 5 and 6, the policy would drive the outcome recommendation to an extent. I mean, you've got to know what the thought is as far as policy wise. I kind of feel like to make a certain recommendation on certain outcomes, if the policy is going to be, we want as many students as possible to have some type of certification or some type of college credit. Well, that's something to go off of. But just kind of understanding how all those, I think they all interact. And you got to have all the information to make a good, solid recommendation. I feel like, others.
I see what you're saying.
I had similar confusion when I was looking at the outcomes piece because it looks more like a reward center. And as a rural educator for 2 decades, I can see some real disadvantages for my particular district in being able to earn that outcome money, because we wouldn't necessarily be able to provide some of the things needed in order to offer those options for students. The other thing that came to my mind too was when we think about AP exams and we think about industry certification exams, all of those things cost money. And when we're thinking about rural districts or impoverished districts, or even students who may not be in an impoverished district, but who are in impoverished communities, they may not be able to afford those exam fees. And are we going to penalize those students and or districts because of that inability? And so that was something else that came to mind is the state going to offer any sort of support to those assessments so that students can actually get those certifications, because that could be a real barrier. And I know that those EPSOs and other programs and getting those certifications are a priority for the state.
So Beth, that has definitely come up with other subcommittees and has been a recommendation that in the outcomes section, that part of the new funding formula is funding for assessment fees. So as a subcommittee, you decide if that's something that is a line in the sand.
It is for me, and as a product of a rural school district, as an educator in a rural school district, particularly if there's going to be funding on the back end for students for districts who have students who are able to pass those assessments or get those certifications, it's not fair to the students or to the districts if they can't afford to take those.
And I think about a conversation with the superintendent trying to start a work-based learning program, and he had no industry in the community. They just didn't have any industry, and the small industry they did have couldn't partner with them. It was a very rural district. So when you start looking at those outcomes, these outcomes on the page assume that those things are options within every district. and they're not always options within every district. Some of them may be options, but not all of them. But then you have other districts where they all may be options. So at that point, are we getting into a position where you have districts that are doing their best to offer these programs, but because they can't offer everything, or they don't have the industry or the support or the teachers to offer these programs, they're losing funding, versus districts that do have the resources to offer these programs on multiple levels, their funding increases. Well, then what are you kind of doing to the situation? So that's just some of the concerns when you start looking at this that pop up in my head. I don't know if anybody else has them, or I could be out there, but I come from a very rural community, and I could see some of these being issues just to get in place.
So Ben, we're kind of already down at the outcomes section. Is there something you feel needs to be added to this list, or just a layer of clarification or specificity?
I think there's a layer of clarification and specificity. Are you looking at only funding only providing incentives to those districts that are able to meet certain criteria, or is it more along the lines of if you're looking to offer these types of programs?
Okay. So this is probably a place to talk about the feedback was pretty much split. So the idea is, do we offer this? Here, I'll go slide on down. Do we offer this to all students, or do we offer this to our typical low performing students that are part of an achievement gap conversation? So it's about split in the feedback, about half and half. So as a subcommittee, really thinking about, do we have a philosophical opinion here about whether or not this is all students, or is this provided or open to students or part of achievement gap space?
Are you talking about, I'm sorry, are you talking there, Jamie, about the state providing this? Is that what you're saying?
So that's, if you look at the outcome slide right here, all these things that are bulleted, some of the feedback has been that these either need to be opportunities or open to funding based on these bullet points right here, open to either all students or just students who are your typical lower performing student groups.
I'd advocate for all students.
Okay.
My initial thought is as a public education system, you educate all students. I mean, irregardless of background.
Isn't that what the weights are for? I thought the weights are supposed to provide those resources and steps. And I think outcomes should be given to local school districts after they determine and find out how much money they're going to receive. And then they work to say, okay, here's what our strategic plan is going to be. That TSBA so great works with local boards and superintendents and their communities and say, okay, here's what our outcomes should be based on the amount of money that our state and our local community says this is what we want our kids to be able to master when they graduate from high school. I think the outcomes should come. I mean, we're putting the cart before the horse. We got to find out how much revenue we're receiving and what we're going to be doing before we determine, okay, this is what we want to do. That's what I'm just thinking.
I'm right there with you, Dale.
And I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just trying to think from a school board and a superintendent's and a community's perspective, based on the revenue that the state sends, based on the revenue that each local community says, hey, this is what we want to invest, whether it be in workforce development, whether it be in AP programs, whatever. Now that you have that money, we're going to hold you accountable. Now here come the outcomes.
And that kind of goes back to the policy decision. Is it tied to to meeting certain benchmarks or doing certain things based on the policy decision. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Based on the revenue is going to determine what plans and what programs are implemented. I mean, it'd be great to have every one of these in each district, but practically that's not an option everywhere. So the options that do exist, you want to incentivize those districts to pursue those options that exist and pursue them at a high level.
And I think districts like Ben had mentioned earlier, and Scott was talking about telemedicine and AP Access for All programs, maybe there's, through these types of conversations, we can let districts know that there's opportunities out there maybe that exist through technology that you've never thought of before. Because I was never a superintendent that did much on telemedicine. Boy, if I were one now, I'd jump all over it. And the same thing with AP Access for All. And Ben said, talked about the community that didn't have any work-based, any industry, but maybe they can collaborate with other industries to be able to even do something through technology with some of their students. So, but I think all that has to kind of come after that. I'm sorry, I got to be quiet.
Now, Dale, I think you're right on point. And what I would add to that is a piece about innovation, and in a way to reward and recognize outcomes that come from innovative activities. And I'm not sure where that goes and which one of these categories, but I certainly think we need innovation somewhere. And that use of human creativity to help kids to learn is so important.
So Nancy, I stuck that up there in direct funding. A lot of
everybody else agrees with that. I mean, you may not. I just think innovation needs to be somewhere.
I totally agree. I'll second that.
And that has been off a lot of the conversation about if we are using ESSER funds right now to implement innovative models in our schools, and that money's going to run out. Is there a way to make sure that this funding formula supports sustainability of those beyond the end of our ESSER dollars?
Yeah. And a really great use data to determine that. I mean, where you can really show effective use of something, then you're not only, we not only need to be sustaining it, we need to be scaling it up.
Mm-hmm.
Since we've come back to this section, can I offer a couple of thoughts around these additional dollars? Is now an appropriate time for that?
Sure.
Okay. So two things. One, on something that's already listed here. I see the high dosage tutoring in 4th grade as a result of the language and the learning loss bill. When I think about that piece of legislation, it's got that trigger that's going to go into effect next year about the automatic 3rd grade retention. I'm wondering if it wouldn't be helpful to add for high dosage tutoring in both 3rd and 4th grades. Let's do some tutoring before any students get retained versus after. And then the other thing that I thought about was, if these are additional dollars, these are wants. I think about a potential teacher mentor program. As we've talked already, that we are experiencing, and it's only going to get worse, an educator shortage that is at critical level, as Dale alluded to earlier. And when we think about folks coming into the profession, particularly those who have been in educator prep programs for the last 2 or 3 years, their learning and training has been just as disrupted as the students in our K-12 schools. And so, our profession is not getting easier. It's getting much more challenging because of the various needs of our students. And when we think about the high turnover rate that we have in the profession, and the shortage that already exists, I think investing in a teacher mentor program would be very, very beneficial, not just for students and educators, but for the profession as a whole.
So I've added that to the list, and we'll just open it up for any other additional commentary, changes.
I would just say, I was thinking like in years 1 and 2 particularly, so not a forever thing, but particularly in years 1 and 2.
So I know we're hopping around, but it seems to be working.
What
Particularly,
about additional dollars? And this just came to mind. For those district staff that have implemented, and I don't know, so this may not work, but to address the teacher shortage, some districts have created partnerships. They decided to become an EPP. They partner with the university. There's a number of different grants and opportunities that are out there. What about additional funding for a district or districts that partner to address the teacher shortage through innovative programs? I'm trying to think of practical ways. Like if they partner with an EPP for their support staff, things of that nature. What do you all think about that?
do you feel comfortable putting it right down here with the scaling and sustainability of innovative models, and then sub-bullet partnerships with EPPs?
It could be, yeah, and I mean, it could be EPPs, it could be within the district, it could be third-party providers. I mean, it's really partnerships to address the teacher shortage, honestly. I don't want to limit it to just.
Okay.
Can we just say partnerships to address the teacher shortage? Would that work, Ben?
Yes, absolutely.
And that leaves it wide open to think about possibilities.
And that could be also recruiting people from other industries.
You could leave for example, great, perfect, Jamie. You were thinking ahead of me.
So any other innovative models we have out there? Of course, already on the list is STEAM, PreK, innovative high schools, already there. Any other ones?
Under innovative high schools, Jamie, does that include the consideration of the early completion of post-secondary credit credentials? So I know that's a real interest of some folks in our region. We have several districts now that are really looking at creative models to having kids in TCATs completing certification while they're still in high school, that sort of thing.
So I know it's part of the outcomes. We have our industry certs.
Yes.
There, but as far as here, I don't know if it's just implied, or, I mean, if we want to pull it out, now's the time.
I'd put it in additional dollars.
I think so too.
Yeah, I think it goes back to Ben's point earlier, it's not reasonable to expect many districts to hit those outcomes if they don't have the investment on the front end that will allow them to create those opportunities. So I would support adding it here.
Do you want it to say early completion?
Post-secondary credentials or post-secondary certifications? Degrees or credentials, I guess we could say, because, I mean, it could be a completion of an associate degree.
Mm-hmm.
So beyond those listed in outcomes. Is that right?
That says it for me, I think.
Okay, so moving back down to outcomes. Now the conversation, if you look here on the slide, do you recommend including all students or only students with historic achievement gaps like low income, students with disabilities, and or English learners? So it may or may not be a general consensus, any type of opinion that we can get to today. Currently over here, I just have outcomes open to. Is that something that you all would like to answer today, or do you still feel like you want to?
I heard that message pretty clearly from the group, that it's open to all students if we're in public education.
Okay.
And I feel that way as well.
Okay, just want to make sure before I typed it out. Any additional outcomes you can think of or specifics? I think by adding it up in some of the other categories, kind of have hit on a couple other places.
Definitely some overlap.
Agreed. Do you feel a need to go back to weights? I know it was something that we kind of touched on, and then we ended up organically moving into other components.
Anyone with a need to go back at this point? We'll have another hit at this after we've looked at public comment.
Well, you're going to find out some information for us about the charter enrollment, right, Jamie? Because I know there were several of us who were confused by that.
Yep.
Jamie, I know we've had a lot of our committee that had to drop off the call, and what I'd really love to do is I know that you have been sending this just for me to proof over and whatever, but I think it really needs to go to our full committee this afternoon real quickly, and I know you have to get it to the commissioner. So I think you can, I think you can give a very definitive, I've got an hour or I've got 2 hours, a window here, but I have to send this on to the department. But do you think that's possible to do or no?
I believe it is. If it's okay for the folks that are on the call right now, to go ahead and just give it a once over, and I'll just keep on scrolling down. When you get to a point, just give us maybe 3 minutes. Just read through, see if there's anything you'd like me to adjust, add, omit. Somebody just give me a shout when you're ready for me to scroll.
I'm going back to that point we made about professional development and so forth too, and I apologize for not knowing exactly the credentialing of an SRO, but do we need to also make a statement there with the continuing education needs that they need, that would be part of that as well? I'm just asking the question out of ignorance.
For some reason, I know they have to get initial training to be an SRO. I'm not 100% sure of what the continuing training, if there is any continuing training, what it entails.
Isn't there something as far as being post-certified that they have before they're SRO and all that?
Yeah, and with SROs, they're not employees of the school district. They're still employees of the law enforcement agency. So the law enforcement agency, their requirements govern as far as continuing education.
Okay, that would make sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, the way the funding works right now, the district just writes a check for a portion of the SRO and a portion of the year to the law enforcement agency. And they remain employed by the law enforcement agency. So.
Thank you. Okay, I'll hit that. The teacher mentor program we were talking about, is there a need to also add that for those principals and, you know, the building level leadership, the principals and assistant principals and so forth, mentoring program? I'm just, again, just raising the question.
So your question is whether to add mentoring for the administrators?
Administrators, yes, particularly your assistant principals. I was just wondering about mentoring program for them. But I don't know if that's necessary.
That's a grand idea. We did it in Hamlin, but we weren't, I think that absolutely is an excellent idea.
Okay. So basically it would mirror what we're doing for teacher mentoring. It would be for administrative mentor programs.
And as Beth said, only in the early part of their career.
Yes. You leave it to the school principal to mentor the new assistant, and that's more work than it's probably worth in many cases for that principal.
Okay, so anybody still need a little extra time to read, or are you fine?
I'm okay, but I do want to offer a clarifying comment based on what Nancy just said. You know, when I think about this mentor program, I know some folks may look at this and be like, well, we already have a mentor program. What we see in a lot of districts is you may pay someone to mentor a new hire, but that there's not really any sort of prescribed, I hate to use the word curriculum, but, you know, kind of support. And I think it needs to be pretty structured if we're going to see the kinds of growth and sustained employment in our earliest career educators. So I just wanted to offer that clarifying point so that it's on record.
I think that's a formalized type of program, right?
I like that.
Does that work?
Yes. All right. Jamie, you've done a great job getting this down for us. I appreciate you very much.
Well, I appreciate you all, and know this was an absolute brain buster today, and an awful lot of push and pull, and we hammered out what I believe to be a really good, strong representation of this subcommittee's, brain, comprehensive brain, and so exciting to pass this along. I will definitely, let you know that between now and our next meeting on the 5th, our 5th meeting on the 19th, excuse me, that we will make sure that you have access to that draft formula ahead of time, so you give it a good look over, and in any of the public feedback that comes from that. So know that meeting 5 on the 19th, we'll have an opportunity to review that and provide any type of final recommendations.
And so, if it's possible, it's 1:30 Central Time. If it is possible to just zap this out to those who are not sitting here right now, and ask them to tell them that they've got an hour or whatever you can give them.
Yep. And give everybody about an hour, I think.
That would be very helpful, and that it will go to the commissioners in 1 hour, but that you'll be happy to take their feedback You can put my mobile number in there if you want to, put Dale's mobile number. No, I'm teasing. But put my mobile number in, and I know you would do the same for you, and just tell them to just voice concern that they might have in that period of time. And we'll do our best to keep their voices in this. And then hopefully the next meeting, I know it will be challenging, but I think this one was really the hardest.
Agreed.
Will be the hardest. I think we're topping the hill. So I'm going to believe that because I am the eternal optimist. You know, I'm digging through a pile of manure. There's a pony in here somewhere. So, all right.